Welcome to the Nairobi Ideas Podcast, a podcast that gives a public platform to the Kenyans who are changing the world with their big ideas. The Nairobi Ideas Podcast is brought to you by the Mawazo Insitute, a Nairobi-based research institute focused on female thought leadership and public engagement with research. I'm your co-host for this episode of the podcast, Kare Mugo. As you might have noticed, we took a short break from the podcast, but we've still been a little busy putting together all sorts of interesting content and events that connect people like you, that is, science lovers and nerds, to the important research and big conversations taking place in Kenya and the region. This includes putting together things like our first Nairobi Ideas Exchange, which brought together leading entrepreneurs, creatives, and changemakers from diverse disciplines to talk about some of the opportunities available for scaling Kenya's budding creative economy, which we consider ourselves, as Mawazo Insitute, a part of. We've also just wrapped up this year's 2019 Africa Science Week Kenya in November. The next Einstein Forum's Africa Science Week is an annual celebration of science and technology that is meant to encourage citizens of different age groups to get involved and become interested in science across the continent. This year, it took place in over 30 African countries, with Kenya as one of them, and we put together a week of really fantastic events around the theme of girls and women in science. We've also been busy working on digital content like the Nairobi Ideas Digest and the Nairobi Ideas Explainer, which give our listeners and readers a deep dive into some of the issues we talk about on the podcast and other current affairs related to science on the continent. You can check out both the Nairobi Ideas Digest and the Nairobi Ideas Explainer on our website, www.mawazoinstitute.org. Okay, now that I have successfully made a case for our absence, we can get to why we're really here. So the year is coming to an end, as is the decade, #anxiety, and we couldn't help but feel a little nostalgic. So we thought, why not do a recap episode and talk about some of our favorite moments and discussions from the year that was the Nairobi Ideas podcast. And of course, we couldn't do a recap episode without our favorite podcast host, Dr. Rose M. Mutiso, CEO of the Mawazo Insitute. Unfortunately, she couldn't make it in studio, but let's give her a ring and see what she's up to. Hello.
Hi.
Hey, Rose. How are you?
Good.
Great. Where are you right now?
I am in London, in the United Kingdom, in maybe Europe. We're not sure.
When do we actually find out?
That is a question that nobody knows the answer to.
Okay. You are currently in the National Park City. How does it feel? Tell us about what you're seeing and finding out there.
Oh, goodness, Kare. During the podcast episode we did with Paula Kahumbu, she mentioned that London was named the first ever national park city. And I have been itching to see what this is all about. I've been wandering up and down. I have seen a few pigeons, a lot of trees. I will give you this. They have good trees. They have lovely gardens. I think I might have seen a fox like in a trash can somewhere, but kind of scavenging for food. But I will say, as a Kenyan and a Nairobian, I am extremely offended because, we are like the OGs of national parks in a city. Like literally, lions are on the loose regularly in Nairobi. That's how deep we are invested in being a national park city. So anyway, London is a beautiful city, but I think we need to petition this people who are kind of naming cities willy-nilly without recognizing Nairobi.
Do you think we need to just put in a stronger bid next year? It's probably like bidding for the Olympics or something.
I'm not sure how it works.
Audience, listeners, please take this on for us if you can. Figure out what it takes to put Nairobi as a national park city, and let's do that. So Rose, I called you in to the studio because we're doing a recap episode, and you've kind of gotten to sit down with a lot of interesting thinkers and scientists over the last year of the podcast. And I don't want to make you pick favorites, but what would you say was one of your favorite moments or discoveries from the 2019 season?
That's a good question. I don't want to cause any offense to all of our lovely guests. And obviously the listeners also have loved different episodes. And I don't want to override their preferences. But since you've asked me, I would have to say definitely an episode I enjoyed. It's kind of cheating. It's not one episode. It's a series we did on the plastic ban in Kenya. So starting with James Wakibia, who was the activist who kind of from the ground up really got the momentum going and got the kind of public opinion where it needed to be for Kenya to pass its plastic ban, which, as we discussed, is one of the most kind of stringent in the world. So it was really nice to hear James' perspective. And then the next episode right after that, we spoke to Dr. Leah, who's a solid waste expert and who kind of came to the topic with a slightly different angle about, the limitations of such a tool, the limitations of plastic bags, what we're missing, in the history of how we manage plastic in Kenya and like the bigger issues around it. So I think both of those really embodied what we're trying to do here with the Nairobi Ideas podcast and the Nairobi Ideas platform, and Mawazo in general is trying to get different expert and opinions on a topic, and also to tie this into the lived experience of everyday Africans.
I love that. I love that we threw in a pitch also at the end. Guys, this is what we're trying to do.
Well, I still have other favorites. Please, can I go through my list?
You have a whole list? Okay, we have time.
Another thing I really enjoyed is talking to David Kimiti from LEA. Dr. David Kimiti is the head of research there. And my favorite bit of that episode is when at the end he said conservation conversation like 10 times.
Oh man, that was like brilliant.
Conservation conversation. I've literally been practicing this phrase all morning, and as you can see, nailed it flawlessly.
Great job.
Okay, and then finally, I would say it was really fun when you convinced me to be the guest. The Meet the Host episode was a lot of fun for me, and I really enjoyed nerding out, and so thank you for that opportunity.
One of the interesting things is that we hadn't discussed this, but I think my favorite sort of moment of the season was that tension between the conversations that Dr. Leah was having around plastic waste management and James's point of view around plastics. Because as an activist, I immediately, was like, James Waikibia is doing incredible things, which he is. And I was like, this is what we need to do. We need to ban all plastics. And then Dr. Leah came in and totally, upended everything that I had thought and felt so strongly about, and, called for more research and talked about how we truly haven't solved the core issue. And it really led me to sort of rethink what I had thought about the issue. I really liked that challenge. And I think I saw it also play out on our social media where people were having conversations and commenting around what Leah was saying and what James was saying. And I really enjoyed that conversation.
Yeah, it was really great. And I think one thing that's important is, all of these perspectives are valid. Just because the overall system is extremely broken, it doesn't mean that as individuals within the system that we can't take action, we can't kind of act with conscience. And so even now, what James said has continued to resonate with me, how I behave, the shame I feel when I use plastics.
Right? Hashtag less plastic is fantastic.
Less plastic is fantastic. That phrase is stuck in my mind forever. And so even if I really appreciate and learned so much from Leah's episode about the nuance of the issue at an individual level, I still feel very challenged by James's call to actions.
I couldn't agree more. And since you named a couple of favorites, I'm just going to also throw mine in. Is that okay?
Okay, so we didn't have that many episodes, so this is basically everything.
Let's talk about getting Paula Kahumbu on the podcast. I mean, Dr. Paula is this award-winning conservationist who has this incredible personal story, and then goes on to do all sorts of really creative things that blend conservation, activism, and policymaking. I think to get someone of her caliber on our podcast for me just felt very reaffirming. And I'm really excited to see who else we get on the podcast next year.
I obviously agree completely. I think it goes without saying that Paula's episode was fantastic. Her conviction, her passion, the clarity with which she sees these complex conservation issues is amazing. And her crazy backstory being a wild child in Nairobi. It was great to hear that. But the thing that was so interesting about how we got Paula on the podcast was just a blind call on Twitter, and then some of our Twitter friends reaching out and the whole thing snowballing to get her attention because, she's a massive star. And so this was an amazing get for us, and also goes to show that when you put yourself out there on social media, some good things can happen.
That is so true. While we're talking about social media and what's out there and ecosystem that our podcast exists in, one of the more interesting things over the last year has been seen where our listeners are based. And so I'm going to throw a pop quiz at you, and no cheating, okay?
Pop quiz, okay.
Yeah.
Right, I'm ready. I'm always ready.
All right. Dr. Rose M. Motiso for 0 points because we're not awarding points.
What? No point?
Okay, you get 5 points. Where do you think our top listeners are country-wise, that is? And I'm looking for top 3 countries.
Oof, I should have paid attention when Maina, our very able research assistant, was presenting podcast analytics a month ago. Clearly, I missed some of the core points. I don't know the answer to that. I would say, and I hope that the top 3 countries are Kenya, which is our home base, and at least 1 or 2 other countries in the region figure in the top 3. And then I would say possibly US is number 2. So Kenya maybe number 1, US number 2. Maybe where would we have fans? Where do people like us? So India. Okay, I'm just like guessing. I'm guessing now, but before we get into the answers, before we do the answers, I just want to say, obviously, we love our fans wherever they are and whoever they are, whether they make the top 3 or not. And as we say in Kenya, ma fans nawapenda wote, nawapenda wote, nawapenda wote, ma fans. Kare, why are you not joining me?
Guys, I can't sing, and we're not going to do this on the podcast. So I'm going to let Rose lead this session of the podcast.
For those of you who are not from Swahili speaking, ma fans tunawapenda wote means we love you, all our fans. Ma fans. Ma fans tunawapenda wote. I love all the fans.
Okay, you give me a diplomatic answer. Okay, I'll give you the answer. You are correct. Our top listens are from Kenya. Then coming in number 2 is the United States. Coming in number 3,
really well.
Is where you currently are right now, the United Kingdom. So you must be doing some great work there.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so then I'd like to apologize to all the United Kingdom people about hating on your national parks. It's all, and the pigeons are the best I've ever seen in the world.
Better than New York pigeons.
For sure.
I just want to give a shout out, to everyone out there. So we also have Germany in there, whoop, whoop, Canada, South Africa, Spain, Australia, and this literally surprised me, Russia is in our top 10. Yeah. So shout out to the listeners in Russia. Please keep listening to us. Everyone else, tell more of your friends about us, please. I think that's really all I wanted to bring you in for, but I do want to say one thing before I let you go. In episode 7 of the podcast, where we got to meet the host, which you mentioned was one of your favorites, we brokered a power sharing agreement about hosting the podcast. And I just must say, I am pretty impressed right now that you're upholding your end of the bargain.
Oh, Carrie, I'm a woman of my word. Also, you're clearly the much more talented host, so I'm very glad to have you on board.
Fantastic. Great. Well, thanks for joining us, Rose, and see you in Nairobi, the true national park city.
Couldn't agree more. All right. Bye.
Bye. That's really all we have for this quick recap, and I hope this gives you a little bit of a teaser around what we did with our climate and conservation theme. I hope that you tune in to listen to the rest of our episodes. And you can also listen to old episodes on the Nairobi Ideas podcast page at mawazoinstitute.org/podcast. You can also subscribe to the Nairobi Ideas podcast on YouTube, iTunes, AfriPods, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. To our listeners, thank you for tuning into our 2019 Climate and Conservation series, where we sat down with scientists, activists, thinkers, innovators, and decision makers who are helping to engineer sustainable African futures. We'll be back with more on this theme in 2020. Till then, from all of us here at Mawazo Institute, bye and keep it nerdy.